Hello and welcome. Continuing this series, today we are going to discuss the syllabus, the topics, and probable question areas within the topics on animal physiology. Animal physiology is one of the biggest areas in paper 2 and there can be no doubt about it. But at the same time, it is very scoring and very interesting as well. Since it is scoring and interesting, a lot of you are quite likely to give disproportionate amount of time to this area. That is something you have to refrain from. But at the same time, since it is an important and big area, it must be getting the needed amount of time, else our score in paper 2 is going to suffer. As a matter of fact, anyone who aspires to score well in paper 2 must be doing the big 3 in paper 2 very, very strongly. The big 3 of paper 2 are genetics, animal physiology, and biochemistry. 2 of these areas we have already discussed their strategy in this series, and today it is the turn of animal physiology. In this video, which is not being done by me, although I'm introducing the video, we have invited an eminent faculty from one of the premier colleges of Delhi University. She has spent years acquiring expertise in many different areas of zoology, and as a matter of fact, she is also going to prepare by invitation a guidance video on developmental biology in this series, and at the same time videos on animal phyla, invertebrates and vertebrates. So she, apart from teaching at Delhi University, has remarkably invested a considerable amount of time and effort in analyzing the trends, the topics of UPSC Civil Service Examination and Indian Forest Service Examination. Like all other video, this video is also rooted in deep analysis of what has been asked, and at the same time we have gotten into some amount of predictions, some amount of forecasting also, because we have to understand one thing, that UPSC does not ask all the questions from what it has already asked. The previously asked questions are important, there is no doubt about it, I am not discounting that. But at the same time, if anyone solely relies on previously asked question, then that candidate will be narrowing his or her horizon of preparation significantly. And every year, about 30% questions which are totally newly minted, newly worded, will put any such candidate who has narrowed his or her preparation into a tight spot. So a little amount of subject insight is needed for we as teachers to forecast what can further be asked to you apart from what has already been asked by the UPSC. And for this, we have gone into analysis. Ma'am has also gone into analysis of last almost 30 years of question. And here we are not intending to overburden you, but at the same time, we are very much committed to keep you safe in the examination and ensure an assured performance from your side in the examination. So, topic by topic, ma'am is going to guide you on what to study within a given topic, what are the emphasis areas, what is the basic nature of the topic, and what kind of question might be asked to you. Since animal physiology is not my area of teaching, it would not have been nice had I been guiding you for this area, hence this invited video. So I would not be taking any more time, and let us go into the core discussion of the video. And like all other videos, keep your pen and paper ready so that whatever new insight you are gaining, you are noting it down and you should be able to use it in your real preparation. So here we go.
Hello everyone. Now I'll be discussing the syllabus analysis of physiology part of the zoology optional for civil services exam. Physiology section is included in the paper 2 of zoology optional, and majority of the question most of the times are asked in section B, although in some years some of the questions have also been asked related to physiology in section A of the paper 2. First, I will be discussing the overall syllabus of physiology, and then I will move into in-depth analysis of each section. So let us begin. So these are the main topics in the physiology syllabus, and you have to do it with reference to mammals that is specifically mentioned in the syllabus. The first part is from the cardiovascular system, and that is blood, and it is divided into topic number 1 and 2. So in topic 1 you have to understand the composition and constituents of blood. You move on to blood groups, RH factor and coagulation, iron metabolism, acid base balance, thermoregulation, anticoagulants. And the second part is hemoglobin, its composition types, and what role it plays in transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. We will do the in-depth analysis of it later on. There are many topics which are not exclusively mentioned in the syllabus, but questions from them have been asked. And then we move on to the digestive system, and in that the focus is on the digestion and absorption and the role different digestive glands play in it. So salivary glands, liver, pancreas and intestinal glands are focused here, and the main biomolecules, carbohydrate, lipids, proteins and nucleic acid, how their digestion and absorption takes place, that is something which is covered in the digestive system. Then excretory system here focuses on the structure of nephron and the physiology of formation of urine. Then osmoregulation and excretory product is also an important part. Under the muscular system, the types of muscles, mechanism of contraction of skeletal muscles and effect of exercise on the muscle is there, and this muscular system is connected to the next part, that is nervous system, through neuromuscular junction, and that is also a very important topic. Under the nervous system, the most important topic is the neurotransmitters. But before that, you have to understand the neuron. The structure of neuron is very important. The functions of the nervous system and the various divisions of it is important. And the conduction of nerve impulse is also very important under this. Then you have the 3 sense organs, the vision, hearing and olfaction. For vision and hearing, there are specific sense organs. So there is the eye and there is ear, but olfactory receptors are present in the nasal area. So question from olfaction has not been asked, but vision is very important and hearing is also very important. Then the last topic is the reproductive system. So there is physiology of reproduction, puberty and menopause in humans you have to cover. Then there are certain questions within it which are also very important. Now something to note here is that endocrine system is not mentioned in the physiology section of the syllabus. That is in detail covered in the chordata section of paper 1 under class mammalia, where you have to study the interrelationships of endocrine glands. But the role of endocrine system in physiology section is not completely omitted. It is covered under different aspects. One is that the hormonal regulation of different systems is very important, and also as part of homeostasis, the role of thyroid gland and adrenal gland has also been asked in the exam. So from these 2 aspects you have to understand the endocrine system as well, although not exclusively mentioned in the syllabus. Now if you look at the previous year questions, then most of the questions have been asked from the nervous system or the neuron part. Every year one question is asked from this section, and from here the most important part is the neurotransmitters section. Most of the questions has been on that only. And then if you see the second most important topic is the blood. Almost every year a question is asked from that section, and hemoglobin, which is part of the blood, also there have been 2 questions over the past 10 years. Now one thing to note here is that homeostasis and stressors is not exclusively mentioned in the syllabus. Nowhere it is written, but still questions like what are the changes in the body of human under stress, or the questions on the adrenal gland, or the questions on thyroxine hormone and its regulation has been asked. So that will be something which was either covered in thermoregulation section or in the homeostasis part. Then if we move on, the sense organs and vision and hearing are the only two sections from where the questions have been asked. Then there is the excretion part, which is very important. Almost every year one question, every other year one question is asked from this section, and similarly with digestion. From muscles, the questions which are asked are basically on the mechanism of contraction and relaxation of the muscle, so that is very important topic there. From the puberty and menopause and physiology of reproduction also the questions have been asked. You have to focus here basically on the menstrual cycle of female, the composition of semen in of males, and also how the spermatogenesis and oogenesis happen. Now, thermoregulation is another section which is very important, and here the role of thyroxine hormone and adrenal gland is again emphasized. So that is something which you have to deal, and questions from that section is also asked. Question on iron metabolism has been asked, which is part of the constituent of the blood only. So this is how the overall analysis is of the past year question papers. So coming to the first section, that is blood, your approach while dealing with this section should be that you should divide it into two sections. First section, you should be dealing with functions and properties of blood in general. Then acid-base homeostasis, electrolytes in body fluid, how different buffer systems are helping in homeostasis, the blood pH regulation, iron metabolism, and thermoregulation. On the other hand, you should look at the blood constituents, the formation of different types of blood cells, then the clotting mechanism and the anticoagulants, and then blood groups. Now coming to the first part, that is functions and properties of blood. So here you should be we know that it is a connective tissue, and its functionalities are actually divided into three parts. There is transportation, there is regulation, and there is protection. The transportation is of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Regulation is maintenance of homeostasis, adjustment of body temperature, thermoregulation, which is separately mentioned in the syllabus, so should be dealt in detail. And then osmotic balance, which is also mentioned in the syllabus, the acid-base balance, so also should be dealt in detail. Under protection, you have WBCs, which do the phagocytosis, which is meant for protection. Complement system, interferons and antibodies. This is one part, and then the other part is clotting mechanism, which is also the protective role, again mentioned separately in the syllabus, so should be dealt in with details. Then under acid-base homeostasis, electrolytes in body fluids, buffer system, and blood pH regulation. So you should begin with the acid-base balance, and in that sodium and chloride are important electrolytes, and their balance should be your focus. And you should focus on the hormonal regulation part, which is the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, the RAS pathway you have to study, and that is something which has its meaning in the excretory system also, so you can deal with it here, or you can deal with it in the excretory system part. Then the other electrolytes which are common in the blood are the potassium, there is calcium, there is magnesium, there is the bicarbonate ions and others. And here the calcium homeostasis is very important. One question on that has been asked. So what happens whenever there is low blood calcium levels? So whenever the calcium levels are low, there is secretion of parathyroid hormone, so that is increased, and that increases the activity of osteoclast cells, which increases the bone resorption, and thus more calcium is released in the blood, and thus the blood plasma calcium levels are restored. The other functionality of PTH, parathyroid hormone, is that it also enhances the reabsorption of calcium from the glomerular filtrate. It also increases the production of calcitrol, which is the active form of vitamin D. Vitamin D synthesis starts in the skin, but it is completed in the kidney. So it acts on kidney and enhances the production of calcitrol. So this active form of vitamin D causes more absorption of calcium from the intestine. So one question on this, the role of PTH and vitamin D in calcium homeostasis, one question on that was asked in the exam, so you should deal with that in detail. Further things to study here are the buffer systems, and under this you should focus on the protein buffer systems, the carbonic acid buffer system, so that has its role in the transport of carbon dioxide also. Then there is the phosphate buffer system. All these should be dealt here, and which will conclude the regulation of blood pH, because these buffer systems and this acid base homeostasis is regulating the blood pH overall. Now coming to the iron metabolism, we know that iron is very important for the formation of hemoglobin, but it is also important for the formation of cytochromes and myoglobin. And 65% of all the iron that is present in the body, it is in the form of hemoglobin only. So what you should focus in this section is the role of transferrin, which is initially present as apotransferrin until the iron attaches to it, so it becomes transferrin. Ferritin and hemosiderin. The role of these three in the transport of iron is very important. Then you should focus on how transferrin delivers the iron into the mitochondria, where the heme synthesis takes place. And the next aspect in iron metabolism should be how excess of iron in the body is dealt with. So excess of iron in the body can be deposited in the liver, or it can be eliminated through the digestive tract. It can be eliminated when the hemoglobin is degraded, when RBCs are dying, they release the hemoglobin that is degraded, and that releases bilirubin. Bilirubin is a bile pigment, so it is eliminated from liver to the gastrointestinal tract, where it breaks down into stercobilin and urobilinogen. Stercobilin gives the color to the feces, and thus the excess iron is removed from the feces, from the digestive tract into the feces. And then urobilinogen is reabsorbed and then goes into the circulation and eliminated through urine. So that is what you should cover here. And then there is the thermoregulation part. We all know that the body maintains a constant core temperature, which is near 37 degrees Celsius, and it is done through various ways, through conduction, convection, radiation and evaporation. So whenever the body temperature decreases, it is a condition which is known as hypothermia. The thermoreceptors in the skin and hypothalamus are activated. They send nerve impulses to the thyrotropes of anterior pituitary. That is very important. And from there, thyroid stimulating hormone is released. This thyroid stimulating hormones has different roles. It causes vasoconstriction. It will act on the adrenal medulla. It will act on the skeletal muscles. And skeletal muscles will then undergo shivering. That is a way to counteract the hypothermia. And then it will act on the thyroid gland, and thyroxine will be produced. So adrenal gland role and the role of thyroid gland here in thermoregulation is very important, and how they increase the metabolic rate is something which you should study in detail. That eventually restores the body temperature back, and if there is high temperature, everything, all of this will be inhibited. So TSH will be inhibited. That will inhibit the release of thyroxine and all the other actions which in case of hypothermia are elevated. In case of the body temperature very high, in fever, all of that is inhibited. So the next part under blood is blood constituents. We know that blood is 55% blood plasma, and there is 45% formed elements. This blood plasma majority, approximately 91.5%, is water. Then there is the 8.5% solutes, and in that majority are proteins. Under formed elements we have different categories. There is RBC, there are WBCs, and there are platelets. And then WBCs also have categories. There are granulocytes and there are agranulocytes. Under granulocytes you have neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Highest WBC concentrate amount of these WBCs is neutrophils. Then under agranulocytes you have lymphocyte and monocytes. So the lowest amount is basophils, the highest amount is neutrophils, and then after neutrophils there are lymphocyte, monocytes, eosinophils, and the last is basophils. So you should know the amount, the percentage of all of them, and the structure, the shape of the nucleus, and the role they play. That is something you should deal in here. Then certain terms are also important here. For example, hematocrit. What is hematocrit? It is the percentage of blood volume occupied by RBCs. Why it is higher in males? The role testosterone plays in elevation of erythropoietin, and then high hematocrit in males. You should study that also. Then we come to the formation of blood cells, also known as hematopoiesis. Here the importance of red bone marrow is there, so you should study about that. And this red bone marrow has pluripotent stem cells, also known as hemocytoblasts, which these hemocytoblast pluripotent stem cells are then they give rise to two types of stem cells. One is the myeloid stem cell and the other is the lymphoid stem cell. The myeloid stem cell further give rise to the different colony forming units, which will eventually give rise to RBCs, platelets, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, and monocytes. On the other hand, the lymphoid stem cells, they give rise to T lymphocyte, B lymphocyte, and natural killer cells. So this formation of blood cells is very important. You should discuss that. With the exception of lymphocyte, formed elements do not divide once they leave the red bone marrow. That is also very important. So you should study all the blood cells in detail, their characteristics, numbers, and functions. Now coming to the next section, that is blood clotting cascade and then anticoagulants. Under blood clotting cascade, the first thing you should do is remember all the clotting factors. So the first thing is to remember all the clotting factors. And then the blood clotting cascade is divided into the extrinsic pathway and the intrinsic pathway, and both of them eventually culminate into the prothrombinase activation. So extrinsic pathway starts whenever there is an external trauma in the tissue that releases tissue factors, while intrinsic pathway is activated where there is any endothelial cells lining the capillaries is damaged. That releases a clotting factor, factor 12. So calcium also plays a very important role in the clotting mechanism, so you should be focusing on that also. Eventually both of them culminate into the activation of enzyme prothrombinase, and that causes prothrombin to thrombin change, and then activation of thrombin, and then thrombin causes the fibrin thread formation in which the platelets get accumulated, and that leads to formation of clot. Here the role of vitamin K is also very important. So how it is important in formation of a lot of clotting factors, you should be dealing that also here. Then coming to the anticoagulants. Anticoagulants, as we know by the name itself, they prevent the formation of blood. So there are different categories of anticoagulants. There are direct thrombin inhibitors, which will inhibit the thrombin, so though no fibrin threads will be formed. An example includes hirudin. and it includes the deciridine, which are the thrombin inhibitors. Then there are indirect thrombin inhibitors, which includes heparin, which includes dalteparin. So these are two indirect thrombin inhibitors. Then there is direct factor 10 inhibitor, which is apixaban is one example, which inhibits the factor 10. And then there are vitamin K antagonists, for example warfarin is there. So there is warfarin. So there are different categories. You should study according to these categories and what role do they have. Why do we need anticoagulants? So there are different conditions, clinical conditions such as deep vein thrombosis. There is pulmonary embolism, strokes, heart attacks, in which these anticoagulants are given, and even in medical diagnostics and blood collection these anticoagulants are used. So the role they play, the categories of the anticoagulants. Then the next is the blood groups, and under that you have to study the ABO blood group, and you need to have an idea about the antigens and agglutins. For example, if there is blood group B, then it will have B antigen, and the plasma of the blood will contain anti-A antibodies. So A will have the A antigen and anti-B antibodies. AB has both the antigens and it doesn't have any antibody, while O blood group has neither of the antigens and both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. And from that the concept of universal donor, universal acceptor comes also, so that should be you should deal with. And then there is very important thing is that these before the formation of A and B antigen, there is the H antigen that forms. So in people who lack even the H antigen or the RBCs, that blood group is called as the Bombay blood group because it was discovered in Bombay. So H antigen is precursor to each of the ABO blood groups. So that is also you should be dealing, a question on that has been asked. Then you should move on to the RH blood grouping. This antigen was discovered in rhesus macaques, so thus the name RH. And here you should focus on the hemolytic disease of newborns, the erythroblastosis fetalis. So RH positive fetus and RH negative mother, if there is, so what happens, some of the RH positive blood from the fetus may leak into mother's blood, and the mother starts making anti-RH antibodies. In the first child case there is no issue, but in the case of second pregnancy, if the child is again RH positive, that can lead to agglutination and hemolysis. So that is erythroplastosis fetalis, and what is done to prevent that. Then you should also focus on different types of blood disorders. A short note should be prepared on this also because a probable question may be asked in the future. Now coming to the hemoglobin part, the structure of hemoglobin is important, its synthesis is also important. So the synthesis begins in the pro-erythroblast cells and it continues till the reticulocyte stage of the RBC. And here the role of succinyl-CoA is also very important. So this will link it with the biochemistry. So succinyl-CoA is an intermediate of the Krebs cycle, and that succinyl-CoA combines with the glycine, and that leads to formation of a pyrrole ring or pyrrole molecule, and 4 of these pyrrole molecules, so 4 of these will form the protoporphyrin 4, and when iron attaches to protoporphyrin it forms heme, so that plus Fe, that will lead to the formation of heme, and heme combines with globin, and then that synthesis of globin occurs in ribosomes. That is a separate thing. So depending upon the amino acid composition of the globin part or the polypeptide portion, there are different subunits of hemoglobin. There is alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. On that basis there are different types of hemoglobin. There is, in the adult, the main is HbA, which has 2 alpha chains, and there are 2 beta chains, that is HbA. Then there is HbA2, which has 2 alpha chains and 2 delta chains, so that is HbA2. So these are two types of hemoglobin in adult. Then you should study about HbF, which is the fetal hemoglobin, having 2 alpha and 2 gamma chains. And then there are very trace amounts of other types of fetal hemoglobin called as the Gower hemoglobin and the Portland. You should study about them also. And then there is a condition called as sickle cell anemia. So in that there is HbS type of hemoglobin under sickle cell anemia. So all these should be dealt in, the types of hemoglobin. Now coming to the last section, there is the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide, which is the transportation role of the blood. So most of the oxygen is transported as oxyhemoglobin, so attached to the hemoglobin, 98.5% to be precise, and most of the carbon dioxide is transported in blood plasma as bicarbonate ion, approximately 70%. Some is dissolved in the plasma and some is also as HbCO2. So in this section of transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide, you should be studying the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So that is very important. And here you should study about the relationships of pH and partial pressure of carbon dioxide to hemoglobin saturation at normal body temperature, and what happens if the temperature is fluctuating. What happens, the role of bisphosphoglycerate in here is also something you should study. So as pH will decrease, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide will increase, and affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen declines in that case. In that case, the less oxygen combines with hemoglobin and thus it is more readily available to tissues. So when the respiration occurs and the oxygen is taken by the oxygenated blood to various parts of the tissue, this mechanism plays an important role. So how that happens, you should be studying here. Also, the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide should be studied with respect to the chemical reactions that occur during gaseous exchange, and here two topics are important. One is the Haldane effect and the other is the chloride shift. So these two topics also you should deal in transport of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood. Now coming to the digestive system, here the digestive glands should be dealt in detail. You can begin with the salivary glands, and under this salivary glands there are three types. There is parotid, there is submandibular, and there is sublingual. You should know their ducts, you should know their location, you should also study the composition of saliva, which of the salivary glands produce the most of the saliva, and under composition of saliva you should be focusing on salivary amylase and the lingual lipase, very important enzymes, so that should be studied. And then chewing and mastication and formation of bolus, and this something should be dealing with also here. Then you should move on to the stomach, and the histology of the stomach is important to understand the location of the glandular cells. Then under stomach you should come to the gastric glands, and in the gastric glands there are both exocrine glands and there is endocrine functionality also there. So under exocrine glands, the glands forming mucus, HCl and intrinsic factor, and under endocrine gland there is the G cell which is responsible for formation of gastrin hormone, which increases the appetite. So that is something you should deal here. So you should also deal it with respect to how bolus to chyme conversion takes place. So bolus is something which is formed in the mouth and that converts to chyme, very liquidy soup like consistency in the stomach. So how that transition occurs, that is also something which is important here. Then we come to the pancreas, and again pancreas have both endocrine role to play and the exocrine role. So endocrine role is done by the islets of Langerhans, which are only 1% of pancreas, and the rest 99% are the pancreatic acini. So pancreas anatomy and histology is also very important. So acini, they produce pancreatic juice, and you should be knowing the composition of pancreatic juice. And the islet of Langerhans, they produce glucagon. There are different cells, insulin. They produce the somatostatin, and they also release the pancreatic polypeptide. So all of this should be dealt here, and here you should also focus on how the insulin plays an important role in glucose metabolism. So insulin and glucagon both, how they play. So that is a biochemistry aspect, although, but you should be looking at it here as well. So what causes the increase in the insulin, what causes increase in glucagon, and that is all you should be dealing here. And then comes the next digestive gland, that is the liver. And so again, anatomy and histology of liver is important. The role and composition of bile is important. So bile, its role and its composition, and under that the bile pigments and bile acids are important. So bilirubin is the bile pigment, and how it is broken into stercobilin and urobilinogen, how it is eliminated through kidney and through feces. And under bile acids, there is the chenodeoxycholic acid and cholic acid, and how they play an important role in emulsification of fats. So that is very important here. Then you should be studying all the ducts, so of coming out of the liver, and how they combine with the pancreatic duct. So the right hepatic duct and there is a left hepatic duct. They form the common hepatic duct, which combines with the cystic duct coming from the gallbladder, and that forms the common bile duct. And then there is a pancreatic duct coming, and that eventually opens into the duodenum. So that is also something you should also be knowing about the sphincters here, which open into the duodenum. And then the endocrine role of liver is also important, where you should be focusing on the insulin like growth factor, angiotensinogen and thrombopoietin. So these hormonal role of liver is also important, and a question on that regard has also been asked in the exam. Then coming to the small intestine, here again the histology and the basic anatomy of small intestine is important. Under the histology, you will have to understand the different types of cells, the goblet cells, which are responsible for secretion of mucus. But other than that, even Brunner's cells are present in the intestine, which have the major role to play in synthesis of mucus. Then there are, but that is something which is found in the submucosa, not mucosa. So that is why histology is important. Then there are absorptive cells which help in absorption, and then there are different intestinal glands. So the intestinal glands are in the crypts of Lieberkühn, and they release the intestinal juice. So composition of that intestinal juice secreted by intestinal glands is important. Then the endocrine role of small intestine is also important, where there are three types of cells. There are S cells which secrete secretin, there are CCK cells which secrete cholecystokinin, and then there are K cells which secrete the GIP, or glucose dependent insulinotropic peptide. So that is also you have to deal here. Then the next aspect under digestive system is the digestion of the macromolecules, the biomolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins and nucleic acids. Carbohydrate digestion starts in the buccal cavity, so you should focus on that. On the other hand, lipid digestion also it starts in the buccal cavity because there is lingual lipase present there. Protein digestion starts in the stomach, so from there what happens, how the different steps are. And then there are nucleic acids also, and nucleic acids are digested in the intestine. The pancreatic juice contains different nucleases which is responsible for digestion. Then the absorption aspect is something which basically occur only in small intestine, and some portion of it is occurring in the large intestine. So absorption starts with the small intestine. So here you should be studying the different aspects. For example, diffusion, facilitated diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, through which all the absorption takes place. And under the large intestine, you should be focusing on because it is largely involved in the haustral churning, so you should be able to understand what is that, the haustral churning. And then the large intestine also inhabits a lot of bacteria, so there are different bacterial products, and some of them are important B vitamins and vitamin K. So the bacteria and the vitamins they produce, that is also important in the large intestine part. Now coming to the excretory system, so here the first thing you should be preparing is the functions of kidney, and kidney has different functionalities. It plays an important role in regulating the blood pH. So pH is regulated by that, and with that it regulates blood volume, and it also regulates blood pressure. So all the roles it plays in these three. Then it also maintains osmolarity, that is very important, and that also helps in maintaining the volume, pressure and pH. So maintains osmolarity. It is having endocrine function also, because there are hormones it releases. There is the active form of vitamin D, that is calcitriol, and erythropoietin, both are released by the kidney. So calcitriol and erythropoietin. Then it also regulates the blood glucose level, so regulation of blood glucose level is important here. Then the main part is the excretion of waste. So not only the excretion, there are many other functions which kidneys do. So you should also understand the external anatomy of kidney, very important, in which you should focus on the renal fascia. Then there is a layer of adipose capsule, and then there is the renal capsule. And then internal anatomy is also very important. Under the internal anatomy, you should study the structure of the renal corpuscle, which is the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule. So internal anatomy is categorized into two. You have the renal corpuscle and you have the renal tubule. So renal corpuscle includes the glomerulus and it includes the Bowman's capsule. So you should study about that and their proper histology also. And then renal tubule includes the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and there is the distal convoluted tubule which opens eventually into the collecting duct. So that covers the anatomy aspect. And then we come to the nephron, and here there are two types of one is the structure of nephron is very important, and then there are two types of nephron also. So there is the cortical nephron. There are cortical nephrons, and the cortical nephrons are majority, 85% of all nephrons are cortical nephrons. And then there are the juxtamedullary nephrons. So these are the two. The rest 15% are the juxtamedullary nephrons. You should be able to differentiate between the two very well. Then you should focus on the histology of nephron also, where you focus on the histology of all these parts in the internal anatomy. You should be focusing on the histology of renal corpuscle and the renal tubule. So you have to understand here the macula densa cells and the JJ cells, the JG cells. So both of these are important, and how they make the juxtaglomerular apparatus, and that juxtaglomerular apparatus, how it is able to regulate the blood pressure. Then in the distal convoluted tubule, there are principal cells and intercalated cells which are important. So how principal cells act when ADH, the antidiuretic hormone, acts on them, and how aldosterone acts on them. So what are the results of that? And the intercalated cells, they have a very important role in homeostasis of the blood pH also. So you should be able to answer that also. So you should study in that aspect also. Then coming to the renal physiology, this section also you should be dealing in 3 parts. Firstly, you should be focusing on the glomerular filtration, and then there should be the tubular reabsorption, and then there should be the tubular secretion. These 3 topics you should be covering under renal physiology, and all of these things should be studied with focus on the hormonal regulation and the auto regulation. So with that, you should be studying both of these. Under the tubular reabsorption part, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, RAS pathway is important. And here under the renal physiology part, how the production of the dilute urine and the concentrated urine that takes place, that is also very important. So production of dilute and concentrated urine and how it is regulated, and in that term the counter current multiplication and exchange mechanism is important. So counter current multiplication, and then there is counter current exchange. So these 2 topics are important, which will clear the formation of dilute and concentrated urine. So now a question was asked in the exam related to regulation in estuarine animals. So estuarine animals means that they are living in a hyperosmotic environment, so they are adapted to that environment. Now the point is that physiology you have to do with reference to mammals, not just humans, so you should be able to answer that question also. So in that case, in estuarine mammals, animals as well as in marine animals, the kidneys, they produce the urine which is more concentrated. So in that case, in a hyperosmotic environment, the kidneys, they produce concentrated urine, and it is very small amount of urine is formed, and in that case they excrete more amount of sodium and chloride ion in the urine. That is able to happen because high osmolarity due to the salt water increases the vasopressin or ADH. So ADH is increased in that case, and ADH causes more water reabsorption in the kidney. One thing is that, and then it also causes increased cardiac pressure. So it increases the cardiac pressure, and it also increases the secretion of atrial natriuretic peptide, and this atrial natriuretic peptide decrease or inhibits the renin, So it inhibits renin, and thus more of sodium ions are released. So this is how you have to answer it. Even in estuarine environment or in marine environment, the process will be same. In case of marine environment, the environment is even more hyperosmotic as compared to estuarine. So freshwater animals who live in freshwater, they do not do that, but in a hyperosmotic condition, that is happening. There is a concentrated urine produced, so you should be able to answer that question well. Here you can also refer to all the aspects of renal physiology which changes under high salt condition. Then coming to the muscular system, the first aspect is types of muscles. So there are 3 types of muscles. There are skeletal muscles, there are the cardiac muscles, and there are the smooth muscles. So the difference between the two, the properties of all the the difference between the 3 and the properties, you should be able to you should be studying. And under skeletal muscle, you should be dealing with its microscopic anatomy. That is very important. And here you have to understand the muscle fiber and its sarcoplasm, and that this muscle fiber in its sarcoplasm, it contains the myofibrils, and sarcoplasmic reticulum encircles it, and these myofibrils, and these myofibrils within them have the filament. So myofibrils have the thick and thin filaments, and they do not extend an entire length. Instead, they are arranged in compartments called as the sarcomere. So this is important. So microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle, you will be dealing in these aspects you will be dealing, and then you'll come to the sarcomere. Here under sarcomere, different terms are important. There is A band, there is the I band, there is the H zone, there is M line, and there is a Z disc. So all these are important, and these are all the components of sarcomere, so you should be able to do that, and with a very nice diagram. Along with it, you should be focusing on different muscle proteins as well simultaneously while you are doing the components of sarcomeres. And under muscle proteins, there are the contractile proteins, there are the regulatory proteins, and there are the structural proteins. So contractile protein example are the actin, myosin, very important. They are the ones which are responsible for contraction of the muscle. Regulatory proteins also very important, tropomyosin and troponin. And the structural proteins are different, many types. There is alpha actinin, myomycin, nebulin, titin, and all that. So you should be knowing all the muscle proteins. Now there is the most important part of the muscular system, the contraction and relaxation of muscles. And for that, the sliding filament model or mechanism is given, and that explains how the skeletal muscle shortens during contraction. Here also the role of calcium is very important, so you should be dealing with that also. And then the neuromuscular junction is also an important aspect which connects the muscular system with the nervous system, but you can deal with that topic in the nervous system part also. Then comes the exercise induced muscle damage. So here you should be focusing how that muscle activity is requires aerobic respiration, and if there is a prolonged muscle activity, that causes the decrease in oxygen, and thus in the glucose metabolism, the pyruvic acid, instead of making acetyl CoA and going into the Krebs cycle, it will be converted into lactic acid. So if oxygen is low, anaerobic respiration will happen. So pyruvate will be converted into lactic acid, and accumulation of lactic acid will cause a little bit of muscle pain. But as soon as the oxygen is restored, lactic acid is converted back to pyruvate, and the aerobic respiration starts again. Then other aspect you should be dealing with is when there is inadequate release of the calcium ions. So that can cause the muscle fatigue, and that has nothing to do with the absence of oxygen. Oxygen may be adequate, but if calcium is low, then that can lead to muscle fatigue. And then when excessive exercise is done, how that damages the muscle. So there is the sarcolemma is torn in that case. So it is torn and there is increase in the blood proteins such as myoglobin and creatine kinase that causes soreness in the muscles and stiffness and tenderness and sometimes swelling also. But if it is if normally there is enough rest is taken, then these sarcolemmas will eventually be repaired, and then the exercise induced damage will be reversed. So these are the aspects you should be dealing in under exercise induced muscle damage. Now coming to the nervous system, it is the most important section in the physiology part, and nervous system also is the most complex body system. It contains a network of neurons. It includes the cranial nerves, it includes the brain, it includes the spinal cord and nerves of the spinal cord, ganglia, the enteric nervous system, and then the sensory receptors. So the first part is the functions and subdivisions. Under that, functions include three. There are sensory functions, there are motor functions, and then there are integrative functions of the nervous system. Under the subdivisions, there are two. There is central nervous system, and then there is the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is further divided. It has the somatic part, it is the autonomic, and then there is the enteric nervous system. So under somatic part of the peripheral nervous system, there are somatic receptors which are distributed in the body and they communicate with the brain. Then the autonomic nervous system is having the autonomic sensory receptors which are involuntary receptor, and the motor region of that has again two divisions. One is the sympathetic division and the other is the parasympathetic. On this, a diagrammatic question has been asked in the exam, so you should be dealing with that in detail. And these two are opposite, having opposite effects. For example, if sympathetic system is responsible for increasing the heart rate, the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system decreases the heart rate. So that is what you have to deal with. And under the enteric nervous system, this part is embedded in the gastrointestinal tract and it influences the digestive processes. Then coming to the structure of the neuron, you should be knowing all the basic parts in detail. Then you should be knowing the types of neurons also. So under that, the multipolar and unipolar and bipolar, or the sensory and motor and the interneurons, you should be knowing that. Then you should also be knowing further in that the neuroglia cells and their types, and what is myelination, and the difference between a myelinated axon and the unmyelinated axon, what is the advantage of having a myelin sheath. So that is also should be dealt. Here you should also be knowing the difference between the gray matter and the white matter. So that is also important. Then coming to the next topic, these are the ion channels in the neuron. So you should be knowing all the types. There are leakage ion channels, there are ligand gated ion channels, there are mechanically gated ion channels, and there are the voltage gated ion channels. So you should be knowing all these four types of ion channels, and then along with it, what is the resting membrane potential? What do you mean by that? And how is it disturbed whenever there is a signal transmission? Then under the graded versus action potential, you should be knowing where they are originating, the types of channels involved in both of them. Then you should be knowing how is the conduction in both of them. Then what is the amplitude? Then the duration of the signal, the polarity, whether it is hyperpolarizing, depolarizing, and whether it has a repolarizing phase or not. Then the refractory period, whether it has the refractory period or not. So amongst graded potential versus action potential, you should know, or whether the summation occurs or not. So question on these have been asked in the exam, so you should be knowing graded versus action potential under these aspects. Then coming to the signal transmission, there can be transmission through electrical synapses, and then there can be transmission through the chemical synapses. And here, when there is a presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons, they do not touch, then in that case the chemical signal transmission takes place. So it is in response to a nerve impulse, a neurotransmitter will be released. And with that comes the most important topic in the nervous system, and that is the neurotransmitters, which the neurosecretory cells release these neurotransmitters, which are of different types. There is acetylcholine, which are the cholinergic neurotransmitters. And with all the neurotransmitters, it is very important that you should be knowing whether they are inhibitory or they are excitatory. So acetylcholine is inhibitory neurotransmitter, so you should be knowing that. Then there are amino acids. Amino acids such as glutamate, aspartate are there, and both of them are excitatory. And then there is the glycine and GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid. They are inhibitory. So there are both excitatory as well as inhibitory. So under excitatory, you can remember the glutamate, and there is the aspartate, and under inhibitory you should remember GABA and you should remember glycine. Then there are certain purines such as ATP, which can also act as neurotransmitter. Then there are the biogenic amines, which can act as a neurotransmitter. So biogenic amines are there. These biogenic amine includes norepinephrine, and which can be both excitatory and inhibitory, dopamine, serotonin. Together they are called as catecholamines. So biogenic amines are there. And then there are neuropeptides. Neuropeptides such as substance P is there, so that is also one type of neurotransmitter. And nitric oxide is also one of the neurotransmitters. So you should be knowing the difference between the excitatory and inhibitory type of neurotransmitter, electrical and chemical synapses, nerve impulse conduction. These are the topics which are very important in the nervous system. Then comes the sense organs, and under that you have to do the vision, hearing and olfaction. Vision and hearing are more important. The questions are asked from these two parts basically. So under the vision, firstly you have to understand the structure and anatomy of eye, along with the accessory structures such as eyelashes, the muscles, the lacrimal glands, the oil glands. All of that you should be knowing in detail, all the parts of the eye. then the 3 layers of the eye, and in that you have to do the retina in detail, and you should be knowing the microscopic structure of the retina. So, and the photoreceptors also, the rods and cones, how the image formation takes place, and also the physiology of vision. The role of the photoreceptors, and the photopigments. That is also very important, and the operation of the photoreceptors is also important. Then you should be knowing the visual pathway, from the optic nerve to up to the occipital lobe. Under hearing, you should be knowing the anatomy of the ear, the division into outer, middle, and inner ear. Then further, how the inner ear has the outer bony labyrinth and the inner membranous labyrinth. Under the bony labyrinth, you should be knowing the 3 semicircular canals, the vestibule, and the cochlea. The diagram of the sectional view of sectional view of cochlea is very important, because here you can actually see all the different parts, the scala vestibuli, you can see the scala tympani, you can see the cochlear duct, and you can see the vestibular membrane, you can see the basilar membrane, and on that basilar membrane lies the organ of Corti, and on that organ of Corti is a thin tectorial membrane which covers the hair of organ of Corti. So understanding these parts under this sectional view of cochlea will help you in understanding the physiology of hearing. Then the auditory pathway is important. And in the end, you should also be covering the role of ear in maintenance of equilibrium. And in fact, in chordates, ear developed as an organ of equilibrium, and only in tetrapose later on it developed as a hearing organ as well. So that will finish with the hearing or the ear. And then the last part is olfaction. So there is not a particular organ of olfaction. In fact, there are millions of olfactory receptors in the nasal area that makes up the olfactory epithelium. So that is there, and in that the receptors, the supporting cells, and the basal cells are important. So you should be dealing with the histology and all these parts of the olfactory epithelium. Then there are olfactory glands which secrete mucus, and that also lubricates the surface. The physiology of olfaction is important. and the olfactory receptor protein, which activates a G protein, and that then eventually activates adenylate cyclase, which results in production of cyclic AMP, and this cyclic AMP eventually opens the sodium channels, which then generates an action potential. So that is all the physiology of olfaction is. So these are all the sense organs. Now the reproductive system, in that the first part you should be dealing is female and male reproductive organs and their ducts and the histology of ovary and testis. So ovary and testes, their histology is also very important, especially of ovary. And all the ducts also, especially in the male reproductive system, the ducts are very important, so you should be covering that firstly. Then coming to spermatogenesis, what are the events under spermatogenesis, and you should be focusing on spermiogenesis separately, which is the spermatid to spermatozoa conversion. So you should be dealing with that also. What are the changes which occur under spermiogenesis, and this part can be dealt in even development biology, or you can cover here as well. Then the hormonal control of the spermatogenesis, where the role of GnRH, LH, FSH and the androgens are all important. Then under the composition of semen, it is a very important topic. Many times questions have been asked from this part. And here you can cover the accessory glands also while you are dealing with the composition of semen. Under the accessory glands, you should be covering the seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the bulbourethral glands. And what do they contribute in the semen? So composition of semen, very important. Then you should be dealing with oogenesis. Oogenesis is, in contrast to spermatogenesis, is something which begins well before birth in the embryonic stage itself, but the primary oocyte gets arrested at the prophase of meiosis 1. So you should be dealing with that, the steps of oogenesis, and while at puberty, what are the hormonal changes that occurs which causes this change where the follicle, the primary oocyte becomes the Graafian follicle, and how ovulation takes place. So ovulation can also be dealt here. So then the female reproductive cycle is also important, and here you should be dealing with the menstrual female reproductive cycle is nothing but the menstrual cycle. Its hormonal regulation is important. And what are the changes that occur in the uterine wall during the menstrual cycle? You should be dealing with the disorders and compare. A short note you should prepare. You should compare the menstrual cycle of the primates with the non-primate mammals where they have the estrous cycle. A short note should be prepared because your syllabus mentions that you have to deal with physiology with reference to mammals. So non-primate mammals have estrous cycle. Should be able to write a short note on that. So compare both of the menstrual cycle of primates with the estrous cycle of non-primate mammals. Then coming to the menopause, it happens between the age of 40 to 55, and what happens, how the estrogen drop is very important because the follicles have all been consumed. As follicles become exhausted, estrogen levels drop. The levels of FSH and the LH, they do not change, but the estrogen level drop is responsible for the menopause. So you should be knowing what are the physiological changes, and both the physiological changes in puberty as well as menopause are important. Then you should be also dealing with the role of androgens post menopause. So what role do androgens have post menopause? And also how the mineral density changes. It is decreased because of the low levels of estrogen. That is also you should be dealing in this part, menopause. So that finishes with the analysis of the syllabus of physiology. And now if you look at the books, then these are the books I will suggest. There are 3 foreign author books very common in the medical field. In fact, medical students also use that. There is Guyton and Hall's Medical Physiology, there is Genong's Medical Physiology, and Tortora's Principle of Anatomy and Physiology. Guyton covers every aspect of your syllabus in detail, so I think I would really recommend that book. And if you feel like going with an Indian author book, then Textbook of Physiology by Dr. A.K. Jain is something I will suggest. So that is all for the discussion. Thank you for listening.